Welcome to Connecting the Dots, an Amici podcast presented by me, George Mingozzi-Marsh, where each episode I meet with an artist to chat about their community, collaborations, and how these connections continue to shape the artists they are today. This latest episode is a particularly special one for me and one I'm really excited to share with you all. My conversation today is with Royal Academician and sculptor Peter Randall-Page, who is something of a cult figure within the community of sculptors. He's a bit of a hero to a whole generation of sculptors, really. And because he's taken the decision across his career to operate outside of the gallery system, he perhaps doesn't have the same level of name recognition and visibility as some of his peers, such as David Nash or Antony Gormley, other artists of his generation. But the work he's made stands up alongside those artists. He's an artist that has a deep connection with the natural world, deep connection with the landscape, and in particular, the landscape of West Devon, where he has made his studio for a number of years, something we talk about in this episode. He's also an important figure to me because right at the very start of my career, as far as it is, Peter loaned me a work called Mother Tongue for one of the very first sculpture exhibitions I did back in 2000 and maybe 10, 11, quite early on in my career. And it was a typically generous act from Peter to take a chance on a young curator with no reputation, no experience, and to lend me this beautiful carved stone sculpture, which became the centerpiece for this exhibition. It gave me a validity that meant that other sculptors agreed to show with me. We were able to put that sculpture on the poster and flyers for the exhibition, which meant that people actually turned up to see it. And I think in so many ways, that act of generosity towards me gave me the confidence to carry on with this line of inquiry and career path that I've stayed on in the years since. In this conversation, we speak about Peter's studio, moving to West Devon, how he found his creative community there, working with curators to put work directly into the landscape around him and finding ways to assimilate that work into the landscape in a way that people from the community felt comfortable with. We also talk about the remarkable period where he and some other artists ran an art school on Dartmoor, which drew artists from all over the country to both teach and to study there, and ended up being an incredible launching off point for so many artists' careers, and something that many people from all sorts of disciplines actually still speak fondly about. And the other thing we speak about is the collaborative relationship that has come about in the last decade, I suppose, with his son, who is a really interesting architect. And they've collaborated on a few different projects, but most importantly for this conversation, they completed a gallery space and archive nearby to his home and studio in West Devon. And the room where this conversation takes place is within that archive. As ever, if you're watching the video version of this podcast at Amici.Art, you will see some additional footage. And if you keep watching at the end, there'll be some additional content. In this instance, we hear Peter talking about a childhood memory that set him on the path to making the sort of work that he makes. But before that, I began my conversation with Peter by asking him about his artistic and creative community in West Devon, where he's built his studio, and how much of that was a community that he found when he arrived there, and how much of that is a community that he has built and developed over the years.
Yeah. Well, I suppose there's a couple of key things there. One is that I didn't know anybody when I moved here, and I'd worked with an organisation called Common Ground before. Are you familiar with them?
No, I don't think so.
Well, they're an amazing small organisation. They're a kind of environmental arts charity, and I worked with them first in 1980, and really they are trying to. Well, they've finished now. But they don't do it anymore. But they were trying to use the arts, not only the visual arts, but all the arts, as a way of helping people to connect emotionally and aesthetically with the particular place that they live. So they came up with a lot of very innovative ideas, like Parish Maps project, where they got people doing subjective parish maps, and Apple Days. You probably heard about Apple Days, where they well, that was all one of their ideas. They've done a lot, amazing organisation. And shortly after I arrived in Devon in the late 80s, they won an award for being the most innovative arts organisation of the year or something. It was a tiny little organisation, had been incredibly influential, actually. And they had a small amount of money, and they commissioned me to make small works of the imagination, I think is how they described it, on publicly accessible land immediately around where I live in Devon, the place where we've just been. And that was a fantastic. I mean, it's the kind of dream project in many ways, because I'm always been keen on the idea that art should be part of everyday life rather than just something which you go and see, in a gallery. And at the same time, it could have gone horribly wrong, because I was definitely an outsider. I'd only been here a few years. And,
no better way to run.
And the idea of me, dotting sculpture all over the place in very, very special, beautiful landscape in a national park could have gone horribly wrong. But I was lucky. The vicar in the village at the time, I mean, I'm not religious, but he became a great friend. He was more of a philosopher than a vicar, really. And he gave the whole thing his support. And I ended up over a 10-year period making a series of works on publicly accessible land. I walked all the footpaths in the area, identified places where I thought I could do things, and then found out who the landowners were, and some of them were interested and some of them weren't. And eventually made probably, a dozen little modest sculptures, some more modest than others, which culminated in the end with being invited by the parish council to redesign the public garden actually in the village. And by the time I'd finished, everybody was very, I did it in a very gentle sort of way, that I started off by repairing a wall, say a retaining wall, and incorporating a little sculpture into it. So I'd done something which needed to be done in the way of repair, and I'd put something new into it. And I've always been interested in the things you get in Asia and in Southern Europe, where you get little wayside shrines and wayside, genius loci kind of feel. And so it was sort of, a lot of it was inspired by that kind of idea. So that immediately created a relationship with my immediate neighbours and people, non-art audience, normally, or people who wouldn't normally go to
set foot in a gallery or something.
And it opened up conversations, with people about art and about what's it for and where should it be. And so that was one sort of strand which was very important to me. So that was with my immediate neighbours, immediate community. And in the end, they've all ended up, including the planning authorities, the national park, and the local parish council, and people in the village. They've really taken a sense of ownership about these things, and they're very proud of them. And they have them in all the sort of tourist literature about things to see and all that. I suppose the other thing that happened was about 25 years ago, I had the idea of starting a sort of pop-up art school in the village. And for 10 years we did that with about 100 students just for a week. And everybody stayed in the village and ate together in a big function room at the back of the pub. And each evening we would have a lecture or a film or something pertaining to art. And we'd have about 10 or 12 different courses, ranging from things like documentary filmmaking to more conventional things like drawing and painting. But even with the drawing one, we had a drawing course where we had a different tutor every day for the week, and coming from a very different background. So you might get a landscape artist, you might get an architect, you might get some people doing very different abstract drawings. So you'd be taken through this kind of real roller coaster of drawing. And we did iron casting, we did performance, and many different things and different courses. So we'd have over 100 students for a week, and probably 30 or 40 artists, and not only visual artists, although I did draw on all my contacts in London. So we got some very good people. We had Antony, Gormley, and we had Richard Deacon, and we had lots of people, so people that were well known enough that people would, and that was open to the public as well. And it really created quite a buzz, and I think it brought in a lot of money to the village, and also it was very good for people who had just left art school and didn't know quite what to go on, and it was a lot of artists who came actually ended up not taking their fee, because they said, well, this is what an art school used to be like when I was at art school, people of my age. People like David Nash or Antony, Gormley and people, and they and it kick-started a lot of people on their careers. So a lot of people have gone on. We had an very good architecture course too, where a group would design and build something to a brief in a week. So you'd have a couple of architectural carpenters, for example, and a couple of architects and a whole load of architecture students. And we attracted people from all over the world. So that, in a way, also was established a kind of relationship through art with the community. Again, the non-art community, and of course the art community as well. And there are a lot, I suppose the third thing is there are a lot of very, very good artists tucked away down the end of lanes all over this area. I mean, there's a lot of craftspeople and stuff like that, but there are also a lot of very, 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 very good artists as well. And some of those have become, very close friends. People like Susan Durgis. I don't know if you know her work.
No, I don't think so.
You can look her up on the internet. And a very good friend of mine, Marcus Forget, who is a sculptor and a musician. And so I've got a lot of good friends around who are very, good artists, I think. And
it sounds like it's been a combination of discovering what there was already here and bringing in outside influence, and that kind of I guess the kind of strength that grows through that cross-pollination.
Exactly.
Different people coming together, and maybe by being here, it's taken out of the pressured environment of a gallery or a formal art school or something, and different things are allowed to happen.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think one of the things we felt very strongly, it was a small group of artists. It was an incredible amount of work, you can imagine, just getting 130, 140 people, finding somewhere to live, and all their dietary requirements and, what have you. But I think one of the things that we felt very much is it's a place you can feel able to fail, able to just try something out, and nobody's going to be, everybody's on your side. And it really did work. It really did work. The number of times I go to somewhere like an architect's studio, big architecture studio, and some young person will come up to me and say, hey, I was on the Dartmoor Arts, and that's what made me want to be an architect. And
that first
here
step.
I am working for, Norma Foster or something.
I think whenever you speak to people who are successful in any industry about their origins, how they kind of got to where they are, they will always talk about there being a person or people who gave them that early opportunity, who kind of opened a door to them, or who, introduced them to someone that, and it's, I think I think we maybe undervalue how important those really, really early days are in
I completely agree. I mean, I was lucky enough to benefit from those sorts of things, probably more than I deserved in a way, but I was very lucky. And I obviously, when I got that sort of opportunity, I mean, one of the first things was when I was a student, I discovered the work of Isamu Noguchi. Do you know his work at all? Yeah. Well, he wasn't well known in this country in the 70s at all. But I came across his autobiography called The Sculptor's World, I think it's called, and got very interested in. And I was already interested in. I was writing one of my theses as a student on the way in which the impulse to make sculpture had manifested itself in the East and in the West, and the different, historically, deep historical sort of thing. And of course, I pretty soon bumped up against Noguchi, who's sort of one foot in both camps. And I was incredibly impressed by, I didn't like everything he did, but I was incredibly impressed by his sense of what a sculptor could do, the breadth of things. So, from designing a bridge to, making sculpture in many different materials, to, land art, to designing, all those paper, all those things everybody's had for years, those sort of paper lanterns, furniture, and I thought, wow, this is really exciting. And I always thought, well, one ought to be able to do all these things I wanted to do everything, and I have done lots of, and I've designed furniture and things in conjunction with installations and landscapes and all sorts of stuff. And I wrote to him a long letter as a very idealistic kind of young, sort of 20-year-old, 19-year-old or something, and sent photographs of what I was doing and really poured my heart out. And he wrote back the most wonderful, wonderful letter.
Really?
Wonderful letter. And actually invited me to go and work as his assistant either in New York on Long Island or in his place. He's got a studio in Japan. Gosh. And sadly, I didn't have any money, and I didn't want to be. He offered to pay the flights. I just felt I can't.
Yeah.
So I didn't. But what I did do is we corresponded on a regular basis until his death. So he was a great sort of mentor.
Really, that's fantastic.
And that was just wonderful, getting such a positive response. And then when I left art school at Corsham, by pure chance, nothing to do with the art world, a friend of mine had sold a dodgy second-hand car to Barry Flanagan. And before Barry even got home, the car sort of broke down, so he took it back. But despite all that, they became very good friends. Yeah. And my friend Andrew said, I've got a really good friend who's just graduating in sculpture. And he introduced me to Barry, and Barry came down, looked at my degree show.
Really?
And then offered me a job working with him. So I worked with him for a couple of years. Yeah. Which is a fantastic, it was great. It was a great time. Fun.
Did he have quite a studio set up at the time? Was it quite a large studio at the time?
No, not really.
So he wasn't
really. Yeah, I mean, he lived around the corner. We lived in Camden Town, just off Camden Square, and he lived in Leighton Road, which was just a short walk around the corner. So I worked with him there. And we were, he introduced me to loads of people in the art world. I thought this is just what happens when you leave art school.
Doors open for you, people ask you.
He took me around all the galleries and introduced me to all the artists, David Hockney and all his generation. And I just thought, well, this is just what happens. And of course, now I realise it's amazing. And he lied through his teeth and told them all that he'd bought the whole of my degree show. He never bought anything of mine at all. So he was very
that vote of confidence,
hugely supportive, which was great.
The final thing I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about was actually the kind of collaboration you've had with your son, I suppose, on this. And I know he's worked with you on other projects, and you've worked on that. It's been gone both ways, and how that has differed from, I suppose, other previous collaborations, and what you've maybe kind of taken from working with him and him coming from a slightly different discipline.
Absolutely. Well, he really did. I mean, right from when he was very little, I mean, he took an enormous interest in the studio and what I was doing. I mean, my father was a diorama maker and a model maker, and he worked from home in the shed in the garden. So I had a similar sort of thing, really. I was always in there making things. But so he was extremely familiar with my way of working and thinking, and was always making things. We made things together when he was a kid. And I suppose, yes, I think the collaborations with him have been, on the whole, sort of genuine collaborations. I mean, they're very rare genuine collaborations. I mean, the real big one for me was doing the thing at the Eden Project, because they were so, they had a very unusual attitude, and they put me together with Jolene Bruce from Grimshaw Partnership.
Oh yeah.
With pretty much equal say in the building, and obviously I can't design a building, I'm not an architect, but they put us together and said, right, we want you to work together as a team, the two of you, and come up with a building and with artwork which is appropriate for the building. And that really was a really exciting, because we got on terribly well, and we've collaborated since, Jolene Bruce and I. But actually, the majority of collaborations, so-called, I'm sorry to say, are just sort of, the architect sort of puts a plinth somewhere, and then, they decide what you're going to put on it, sort of thing, which isn't really a collaboration at all. But the collaboration with Tom, it really is a collaboration, because we throw ideas around, and and we genuinely capitulate if the other person's idea is better, which was also the key to working so well with Jolene Bruce. We were able to
having that trust that you're
have that
able
trust,
to step back.
And also that sort of not to get sort of possessive about your original idea and think no, that's how we have to do it, because that's what I first
you're in
thought of.
pursuit of a kind of a
Somebody
greater
comes up with a
ideal.
better idea, and you've got to be able to see that on both sides.
I need to thank Peter for being so generous with his time and for taking us around his incredible studio setup. I hadn't seen Peter for a few years, so it was really lovely to catch up with him again. Just to run through a few things that we covered in that conversation. The gallery and archive where we recorded that conversation, and we mentioned, was the Art Barn, which was a collaboration with his son Thomas Randall-Page, who is a fantastic architect, well worth looking up some of his other projects online. There are plenty of write-ups about the Art Barn. I think it won a DZine award amongst other things. Peter also mentioned the Eden Project commission, and that was his sculpture Seed from 2007. And in 2003, when the Eden Project was relatively recently opened, Peter was commissioned along with Grimshaw Architects to design a new educational building at the Eden Project, which is this amazing biodome garden in Cornwall. And they came up with the idea for a building whose roof structure was based on geometric principles found in nature, the Fibonacci sequence, the golden proportion that we find in pine cones and sunflower heads. And at the centre of this building is a specially designed chamber that houses Seed, which is this enormous carved granite sculpture, which is based on that same spiral phyllotaxis pattern that is held within the structure itself. And for those of you who are watching the video version of this podcast at Amici.Art, I included some photos of the development of that project in there. If you want to see some of Peter's work yourself, there's loads of it in public spaces across the country. And if you want to look up the show he had at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park in 2009 to 2010, which was one of the most extraordinary sculpture shows I can recall seeing, and it took over 2 or 3 of their gallery spaces as well as out in the landscape. And I think really defined Peter as one of the great sculptors of his generation. Thank you so much for joining us for this second episode of Connecting the Dots. Again, for those of you watching at Amici.Art, keep watching now for a little bit more footage from Peter's studio, where he talks to us about a childhood memory which was formative in creating this ongoing curiosity that he has with the natural world and natural forms.
I think also the kind of memory that I have as a child of picking up a chrysalis, you know, and it looks dry and kind of unpromising. It looks like, it looks like, yes, it's probably organic because it's got mirror image symmetry. But other than that, it doesn't look very alive.
No.
And I remember picking something up like that, must have been about, my granddaughter's age, probably 6 or 7 years old. And as you hold it in the palm of your hand, the warmth of your hand makes it, and suddenly it'll wriggle. And that sort of extraordinary sense of that, what is dead and what is alive, and what, and that kind of, I was always interested in fossils as well for that very reason, because it's organic, but it's actually made of stone. And so, yeah, I think that all those things sort of fed into this idea.